Hashtag they thought no one would come. Then humanity descended like thunder. The red dust of Xylo's prime coated everything. It found its way through the smallest cracks in the habitat domes, settled in the folds of clothing, and stained the skin of those who labored beneath its rust-colored sky. Even through her filtration mask, Lyra could taste it, metallic and bitter like blood and defeat. She paused in her work, straightening her slender back as much as she dared without drawing attention. The overseer was distracted, berating a group of younger Varani for their slow progress. It gave her a moment to catch her breath and glance upward through the transparent ceiling panels of Mining Section 12. Above, the massive gas giant that Xylos orbited dominated half the sky, a swirling mass of amber and gold that the Cthar had named Dominion. The irony wasn't lost on Lyra. Dominion hung above them always, much like the Cthar Empire itself. Vast, impersonal, and inescapable. Back to work, Blueskin. The harsh voice shattered her moment of respite. Overseer Vorg approached, his heavy, scaled body moving with surprising speed across the mining floor. Productivity in this sector is down 12%. Perhaps you need motivation? Lyra lowered her gaze immediately, her pale blue fingers resuming their sorting of mineral fragments on the processing belt. No, Overseer. Forgiveness, Overseer. The words were automatic, beaten into her since childhood. The tall Cthar loomed over her, his verticality an evolutionary advantage his species flaunted. Vorg's breath stank of the fermented bone mash the Overseers favored, and the retractable claws on his three-fingered hand tapped impatiently against the shock baton at his belt. Third-generation slave stock should know better, he hissed, yellow eyes narrowing. Your parents worked these mines until they expired. You should have learned from their mistakes. Lyra said nothing. What was there to say? Her parents had died when she was barely old enough to join the workforce herself. 10 cycles of backbreaking labor later, she was considered a veteran among the Varani slaves, a dubious honor that meant only that she had survived where others hadn't. Vorg snorted, apparently satisfied with her submission, and moved on to terrorize another section of workers. Lyra exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing a fraction. The other Varani around her, skinny, blue-tinged humanoids with large, expressive eyes, exchanged furtive glances of relief. They all wore the same shabby, gray jumpsuits, the same filtration masks to protect their lungs from the worst of the iron oxide dust. The Cthar value them for their dexterity and their geoempathic abilities, limited though they might be, that helped locate rich mineral veins. It was these same geoempathic abilities that the Cthar had so thoroughly exploited, never realizing they might serve other purposes. Lyra's people could sense energies, vibrations, and sometimes, though this was rare, emotions. But such gifts were fading with each generation born into captivity. As her nimble fingers resumed their work, Lyra's mind drifted to the stories whispered in the darkness of the barracks after lights out. Stories that could earn a beating, or worse, if overheard by the wrong ears. Tales of those who came from the black sky, humans from a planet called Earth. Warriors who once fought the Cthar to a standstill before mysteriously disappearing from the galaxy. Fairy tales, the elders would say, even as they passed them on, but tales with truth at their heart. The Cthar considered humans extinct or subjugated, a footnote in their history of conquest. But the Varani remembered. They sang the songs in hushed tones, carved their symbols in hidden places, and kept alive the hope that, someday, someone might hear their silent screams across the void. A distant alarm sounded, signaling the end of the work shift. Lyra's arms ached as she made her final sort, separating the precious ghost fire crystals from worthless rock. 12 hours of standing, bending, sorting. The crystals would power Cthar weapons and ships, while the Varani huddled in cold barracks, allotted just enough food and rest to keep them productive. The workers filed out in orderly lines, passing inspection points where their day's work was evaluated. Those who fell short would find their rations reduced. Vorg stood at the exit, yellow eyes tracking each slave. When Lyra passed, he reached out, catching her thin arm in his scaled grip. "Your section's production numbers have been falling," he growled, pulling her close enough that she could see the serrated edges of his teeth. "Perhaps a night in solitary would improve your focus." "Production is down because Vein 6 is depleted," Lyra said, immediately regretting her words. It was dangerous to contradict an overseer, but more dangerous to be punished for something beyond her control. Vorg's grip tightened painfully. "Are you a mining engineer now? Perhaps the slave thinks she knows better than Cathar geological surveys?" Other workers kept their heads down, hurrying past. No one would intervene. To do so would only guarantee shared punishment. "My apologies, overseer," Lyra said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I spoke out of turn." Vorg studied her for a long moment, then shoved her toward the exit. "Go. But remember, I'm watching you, Blueskin. One more mistake, and you'll join your parents in the mass graves." Lyra stumbled forward, quickly merging with the flow of workers heading to the barracks. Her heart hammered in her chest, but she kept her face impassive. Fear was weakness, and weakness invited predation. The workers' compound consisted of a series of low, utilitarian structures arranged in concentric rings. The outer rings housed the most disposable slaves, those who worked the most dangerous sections of the mines. The inner rings were for the skilled workers, the overseer's favorites, and the few Varani who had earned the dubious privilege of serving in Cathar homes rather than the mines. Lyra's barracks was in the middle rings, a reflection of her status as experienced but not favored. As she entered the sterile, overcrowded space, she noticed an unusual tension in the air. Small clusters of Varani huddled together, speaking in hushed tones that fell silent as she approached. Alara, one of the few remaining elders, beckoned her over. The old woman's blue skin had faded to an almost grayish hue with age, and her once bright eyes had dulled, but her mind remained sharp. "What's happening?" Lyra asked, sitting beside her on a thin sleeping mat. Alara glanced around before answering, her voice barely above a whisper. "Vorg has ordered a search of the Faith Stones. He claims they represent an unregistered religion, forbidden under Cathar Ordinance 15. Lyra's stomach tightened. The Faith Stones were the last physical connection many Varani had to their history, small carved rocks bearing symbols that predated their enslavement. They were kept hidden in a small alcove in the communal washing area, behind a loose panel. For generations, they had remained undiscovered. "How'd he find out?" she asked. Alara's weathered face hardened. "Treachery, or carelessness. It doesn't matter now. When? Tonight, during the sleep cycle." Alara placed a gnarled hand on Lyra's. "We need to move them." Lyra shook her head. "If they're found in anyone's possession, if they're destroyed, a part of us dies with them," Alara insisted. "You know the central stone? The one with the spiral and 3 stars." Lyra nodded. "It was the oldest, most revered of the Faith Stones. Legend says it's older than our enslavement, that it depicts the system where humans originally found us, before the Cathar came. If it's lost, the implications were clear. It wasn't just a carved rock. It was a symbol of a time before chains, a connection to allies long lost. "I'll help," Lyra said. The plan was simple but dangerous. While most of the barracks slept, Lyra would retrieve the stones and hide them in one of the abandoned mining tunnels where she sometimes went to find solitude. Alara would create a distraction if necessary, though what an elderly Varani could do to distract armed Cathar guards was left unspecified. As the sleep cycle began and the harsh lights dimmed to a dull blue glow, Lyra lay fully clothed on her mat, counting the minutes. Around her, the sounds of the barracks at night filled the air, soft breathing, occasional whimpers, the creaking of thin mattresses. When the chronometer displayed the deepest hour of night, she slipped from her bed. Moving silently between the rows of sleeping bodies, she made her way to the washing area. It was deserted as expected. The Cathar valued efficiency in all things, including hygiene. Water was only provided during designated periods. Lyra knelt beside the loose panel, her fingers finding the hidden catch that allowed it to swing open. Inside the small cavity behind it, a collection of carved stones gleamed dully in the low light. Each was no larger than her palm, each bearing symbols whose meanings had mostly been lost to time. She reached for the central stone, the one Alara had mentioned. The spiral pattern seemed to catch what little light there was, giving it an almost phosphorescent quality. As her fingers closed around it, a strange warmth spread through her hand. Then disaster. The heavy tread of Kthar boots echoed in the corridor outside, accompanied by Vorg's distinctive voice. "In here, my informant says the contraband is hidden in the washing facilities." Lyra froze, clutching the central stone. There was no time to grab the others, no time to replace the panel. The footsteps were too close. The washing area had only one entrance. Making a split-second decision, she slipped the stone into her jumpsuit and darted into one of the cleaning cubicles, pressing herself against the wall. Perhaps they wouldn't conduct a thorough search, perhaps. The door slammed open. Lights blazed to full intensity, searing her dark-adjusted eyes. Well, Vorg's voice dripped with malicious pleasure. A slave out of bed during sleep cycle. How fortunate. 2 Kthar guards flanked him, their scales gleaming under the harsh lights, shock batons at the ready. Lyra swallowed hard, her mind racing for an explanation. "I was unwell, overseer," she said, forcing herself to sound meek. "The food rations today." "Spare me your excuses," Vorg cut her off. His gaze shifted to the open panel in the wall, and his mouth curved into what passed for a smile among his kind. "Ah, there they are. The infamous faith stones I've heard so much about." He lumbered over to the hiding place, his massive frame blocking Lyra's view. The guards kept their weapons trained on her, preventing any movement. "Primitive superstition," Vorg said, his voice thick with contempt as he examined one of the stones. "Did you truly believe carved rocks would save you? That your forgotten allies would return?" He turned, fixing Lyra with his cold stare. "Where's the central stone? My informant was specific about its importance." Lyra's hand involuntarily moved toward her hidden pocket before she caught herself. "I don't know what you mean, overseer." Vorg's eyes narrowed. "Search her," he ordered the guards. Rough hands grabbed Lyra, patting down her thin frame with bruising efficiency. It took only moments for them to find the bulge in her pocket. One guard extracted the central faith stone, holding it up to the light. "Ah, there it is," Vorg said, taking the stone. He examined it closely, turning it in his scaled fingers. The spiral and 3 stars. "How pathetic that you cling to such things." Lyra lunged forward without thinking. "Don't!" A guard's shock baton caught her across the midsection, sending her crashing to the floor. Pain radiated through her body, muscles spasming from the electrical charge. Through watering eyes, she watched Vorg gather all the faith stones. He held up the central one last, making sure she could see what happened next. "Let this be a lesson in reality," he said, and crushed the stone in his powerful grip. Fragments rained to the floor, ancient carvings reduced to dust. Something broke inside Lyra at that moment. Not just hope, but the very chain of fear that had held her in check for so long. The guards dragged her to her feet. Vorg gestured dismissively. "Take her to solitary. No rations for 3 cycles." As they hauled her away, Lyra caught sight of faces peering from the barracks. Alara among them, her aged eyes filled with unshed tears. The other faith stones disappeared into a security container destined for destruction. Solitary confinement on Xylos was a series of cramped cells carved directly into the bedrock beneath the compound. No light penetrated here except for the dim glow strips activated when the guards came with water, just enough to keep a prisoner alive. The air was thick with dust and the lingering despair of those who had been confined before. Lyra sat in darkness, knees drawn to her chest. The pain from the shock baton had subsided to a dull ache, but a deeper pain consumed her now. The faith stones were gone, the last tangible connection to the Verani past, to the time before enslavement. The central stone, said to be a gift from the humans themselves, was dust beneath Vorg's feet. Hours bled into what she assumed were days. In the darkness, time lost meaning. They brought water twice, but no food, true to Vorg's punishment. Her stomach had gone from painful cramping to a hollow emptiness that seemed to mirror the void in her spirit. Yet, as her body weakened, something strange happened. The geoempathic sense that had been trained for mining began to expand in unexpected ways. Perhaps it was delirium from hunger, perhaps the isolation, but Lyra began to sense the stone around her in new ways. Not just its composition, but echoes of energy within it. During what she guessed was the third sleep cycle of her confinement, something drew her attention to the rear wall of her cell. A different density, a hollow space beyond. With nothing to lose and time weighing heavily, she began to explore with her fingers, tracing the rough surface until she found it, a section where the native rock had been inadequately fused with construction material. Hours of careful work weakened this section enough for her to break through. The space beyond was narrow, barely wide enough for her thin frame, but it extended further than she could see. A maintenance tunnel, perhaps, or a natural formation that Cthar had incorporated into their structure. Caution warned her to wait, to time her escape with shift change. But deeper instinct pushed her forward. If she weakened further from hunger, she might not have the strength to take this chance. Decision made, she squeezed through the opening, scraping skin from her shoulders and hips in the process. The tunnel sloped downward, leading deeper beneath the compound. Lyra followed it, one hand on the wall for guidance, the other extended before her. Her geoempathic sense provided some awareness of the space, preventing her from walking into dead ends or precipitous drops. She lost track of how long she crawled and climbed through the dark. The tunnel system was extensive, branching in multiple directions. Some passages showed signs of recent use, tool marks, boot prints in the dust. Others appeared abandoned, their air stale and untouched for years. It was one such abandoned passage that called to her, not with sound, but with a strange resonance that her geoempathic sense detected. Something technological lay dormant there, different from the Cthar equipment she was familiar with. The passage ended in a collapsed section of tunnel. Recent, by the look of it, perhaps from the same groundquake that had damaged Faithstone repository. Lyra began to dig with her bare hands, pulling aside smaller rocks, circumnavigating the larger ones. Behind the collapse, she found it, a small chamber that must have been sealed for decades, if not centuries. The air inside was remarkably clean, preserved by some ancient environmental system. And in the center, half buried in fallen debris, lay a device unlike anything she had seen in Cthar technology. It was roughly cylindrical, its surface covered in faded markings that nonetheless made her breath catch. Among them was a spiral with 3 stars, the same symbol as on the central Faithstone. Heart-pounding, Lyra cleared the remaining debris from the device. It was surprisingly light for its size, made of materials she couldn't identify. No obvious controls presented themselves, but as she turned it in her hands, searching, a section of the casing responded to her touch, glowing faintly. Symbols appeared, unfamiliar yet somehow recognizable. Instructions, she realized. The device was some kind of transmitter, ancient, but designed to be intuitive even to those who didn't share its maker's language. Hope and desperation warred within her. If this was what she thought, a human communication device from the time before the Cthar, it might still function. It might connect to whatever remnants of humanity still existed out there in the darkness between stars. Or it might do nothing. Or worse, it might alert the Cthar to her escape in this hidden place. Lyra closed her eyes, gathering what little strength remained in her undernourished body. Then, following the ghostly instructions hovering above the device, she activated it. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the device hummed to life, vibrating gently in her palms. A soft blue light emanated from its core, building in intensity until it projected a sphere of stars above it. A navigational map. One point pulsed red, presumably marking Xylos. Another, far across the projection, pulsed green. The device was establishing a connection. Lyra held her breath. The projection flickered, nearly faded, then stabilized as the device drew more power from some hidden source. A message panel opened within the star map, and Lyra instinctively understood this was her chance. She didn't know if anyone would receive the transmission. She didn't know if the language settings were correct, but she spoke anyway, pouring her heart into words that might cross the void. This is Lyra of the Varani, from Xylos Prime in the system the Cathar called Dominion. If anyone receives this, if humans still exist, we need help. We have been enslaved for generations. We remembered you. Please. Her voice broke. Please remember us. The device pulsed once more, brightly, then dimmed to a standby glow. Whether the message had been sent, whether it would reach anyone, these were questions without answers. Lyra slumped against the chamber wall, exhausted but somehow lighter than she had felt in years. She would rest, then find her way back to the compound. Her absence would have been noted by now. There would be consequences. But she had done something, taken action rather than accepting fate. Whatever came next, she would face it knowing she had tried. As the device's glow provided meager illumination in the ancient chamber, Lyra closed her eyes. Around her, the red dust of Xylos settled silently in the still air, covering the evidence of humanity's long-ago presence as it had for centuries. Above, the night sky remained empty of rescuers. But somewhere, across the vast distances of space, a signal traveled. A whisper among the stars. A cry that had not been heard in generations. A cry that would not go unanswered. Far beyond the region of space the Cathar Empire designated as the Forgotten Reach, at the very edge of what had once been called the Kuiper Belt, Deep Watch Station Epsilon floated in the endless night. To casual observation, it appeared to be nothing more than another frozen planetoid among thousands, its surface unmarked by anything but the natural scars of cosmic impacts. This was by design. The station's true facilities lay beneath kilometers of ice and rock, invisible to all but the most advanced scanning technology. And even then, countermeasures and stealth systems ensured that any curious observer would see only what Station Epsilon wanted them to see: nothing. In the primary analysis hub, deep within the station's heart, senior analyst Kira Navarrette's routine shift was coming to an uneventful close. 18 hours of monitoring the void, cataloging the usual background noise of the cosmos, preparing reports that would be filed and, likely, never read. The Forgotten Reach had been silent for over a century. It would remain silent today, as it had yesterday, as it would tomorrow. Until it wasn't. The alert was subtle at first, a deviation in the pattern recognition software that monitored the ancient frequencies. Frequencies that hadn't carried meaningful data since the fall of the outer colonies and the implementation of the Silence Protocol. Kira might have missed it if she hadn't been unusually attentive, fighting the boredom of her final hour on shift. But the anomaly registered, and she found herself staring at a signal pattern that, according to every operational parameter, shouldn't exist. "Computer, isolate that signal and enhance," she said, sitting forward in her chair. Full spectrum analysis. The station's AI complied, separating the signal from the cosmic background radiation. What emerged was unmistakable. A structured transmission using encoding protocols that had been standard for human colonies before the Cathar War. Protocols that hadn't been used in active communication for over a century. Kira's hands moved swiftly over a console, running authentication sequences, verifying what her instincts already told her was true. The signal was genuine, emerging from deep within the Forgotten Reach, from a world that, according to official records, had been lost with all hands during the final days of the conflict. "Oh my God," she whispered as the decryption completed and the message played, distorted by distance and time, fragmented in places, but unmistakably a human voice speaking through a translator matrix designed for non-human vocal structures. "Lyra of the Varani, from Xylos Prime in the system the Cathar called Dominion. If anyone receives this, if humans still exist, we need help. We have been enslaved for generations. We remembered you. Please remember us." For a moment, Kira sat frozen, the implications washing over her. Xylos Prime, a mining colony established in the final expansion push before the war. Listed as destroyed in 2291. Its population, human colonists, and the indigenous Varani they had partnered with, presumed dead. But they weren't dead. At least, not all of them. They had survived, enslaved under Cthar rule for generations. And now, impossibly, they had found a way to call home. Protocol dictated her next actions with crystalline clarity. Kira's fingers flew across her console, encoding the transmission with the highest security clearance. Then she opened a direct channel to Solar Command, overriding all standard communication hierarchies. Deep Watch Station Epsilon to Solar Command Actual. Authentication code Indigo 70 Echo Tango. Invoking Thunder Protocol. I repeat, Thunder Protocol is now active. Transmission follows. She uploaded the message, knowing what she had just set in motion. Thunder Protocol wasn't just an alert system. It was a declaration of war. Established in the dark days after the armistice with the Cthar, it had never been officially rescinded, despite a century of uneasy peace. If humans had indeed survived as slaves in Cthar territory, if they had somehow managed to call for help, the response came far more quickly than she had anticipated. A direct channel from Solar Command, not some mid-level officer, but from the highest authority. Confirmation received Epsilon. Thunder Protocol acknowledged and implemented. Maintain your station. Delete all local copies of the transmission. This conversation never occurred. The channel closed with finality, leaving Kira alone with the weight of history shifting around her. She completed the mandated security procedures, erasing all traces of the transmission from her local systems. Then, against all training and protocol, she whispered a response to the void, to a woman she would never meet, on a world she would never see. We remember, Lyra, and we're coming. Across the solar system, encrypted channels that had lain dormant for decades suddenly activated. Commands were issued without public announcement or debate. In orbital shipyards around Mars and the moons of Jupiter, vessels that officially didn't exist began final preparations. These were not the sleek, diplomatic ships of the United Terran Confederacy that plied the established trade routes and maintained the facade of peaceful coexistence with the galaxy's other powers. These were weapons, angular, dark-hulled ships designed for a single purpose that most of humanity had tried to forget was still necessary. Deep in the asteroid belt, within a hollowed-out planetoid designated only as Facility Alpha, Admiral Karavolkov received the Thunder Protocol alert while reviewing training exercises. The message was brief, containing only the authenticated transmission and coordinates for the source. Volkov's scarred face remained impassive as she absorbed the information. Only a subtle tightening around her eyes betrayed any emotion, a cold flame kindling behind her gray irises. Status of the 7th Fleet? She asked the room at large, her voice carrying the faint accent of someone raised in the deep space colonies. Her XO, Commander Reyes, responded immediately. All vessels at combat readiness, Admiral. Strike teams have completed their rotation from Mars last week. Munitions at 97% capacity. Volkov nodded once. Deploy the fleet. Fold space jump calculations for the Dominion system, specifically Xylos Prime. I want us there yesterday, Commander. Rules of engagement, Admiral? Reyes asked, the question loaded with implications. Volkov's gaze hardened. Thunder Protocol, Commander. The Cthar have maintained slaves of human allied species for a century while we honored a peace they never intended to keep. There will be no negotiation, no warning, no mercy. She paused, then added with cold precision. We are the thunder after the lightning they thought killed us. And unlike thunder, we don't just make noise. We break things. The command center erupted into controlled activity. Orders were transmitted, deployment sequences initiated. Within hours, the 7th Fleet, colloquially known as the Silent Avengers, broke orbit from their hidden bases throughout the solar system. Each vessel bore minimal markings. Only a blood-red clenched fist on a black background. No registration numbers. No diplomatic identifiers. They were ghosts, the embodiment of humanity's carefully contained rage, finally unleashed. In her private quarters aboard the dreadnought Nemesis, Admiral Volkov reviewed the final deployment plans. On her desk sat a small wooden box containing a medal, the Colonial Service Cross awarded posthumously to her parents after the Kthar bombardment of New Vladivostok. She had carried it through decades of service, through the long years of watching and waiting while politicians preached peace and accommodation. Now, finally, the waiting was over. "Computer," she said, closing the box with reverent fingers, "shipwide address." A soft tone indicated the channel was open to all decks. "This is Admiral Volkov. As you have been informed, Thunder Protocol is now active. Our destination is the Xylos Prime system in what was once the Outer Colonies, now Kthar-controlled space." She paused, gathering words worthy of the moment. "For a century, we have maintained the fiction of peace while rebuilding our strength. For a century, we have watched the borders while the politicians claimed the Kthar were evolving, becoming more civilized, worthy of trust. Now we know the truth. They have enslaved our allies, possibly our own people, on worlds we were told were dead." Her voice hardened. "Every one of you volunteered for the 7th, knowing this day might come, knowing what would be asked of you. The Kthar believe we are weak, that we have forgotten our strength. They are about to learn otherwise." Another pause. "We jump in 6 hours. When we arrive, we will face an enemy unprepared for our existence, much less our vengeance. There will be no quarter given, no prisoners taken among the Kthar leadership. We go to liberate, not to conquer. But make no mistake, we also go to punish." She let the silence stretch for a moment before concluding. "Those we lost still watch us. Those who wait for us still believe in us. We will not fail either group." Volkov out. The channel closed. Admiral Volkov turned to the viewport, gazing at the assembled fleet, 20 capital ships and their escorts, the largest combat force humanity had fielded since the last war. Soon they would vanish into fold space, crossing light years and hours instead of decades. And when they emerged, the Kthar would learn that some enemies should never be presumed defeated, only delayed. Some slights were never forgotten. Some debts would always be collected in full. Lyra's punishment for escaping solitary was severe, but not fatal. The Kthar valued efficiency above all, and a dead slave produced nothing. Instead, she was reassigned to the most dangerous section of the mines, where the risk of tunnel collapse was highest and the air filtration systems were oldest. 3 weeks had passed since she had activated the ancient transmitter. 3 weeks of heightened security, random inspections, and an atmosphere of tension that affected even the normally unflappable Kthar overseers. Something had changed, though Lyra had no way of knowing if it was connected to her actions or merely coincidence. The collapse, when it came, was not in her section but 2 tunnels over. The ground shook, dust billowed through the ventilation system, and alarms blared. Standard procedure called for all workers to evacuate to designated safe zones, while Kthar engineers assessed the damage. It was during this chaotic evacuation that Lyra found herself separated from her work group and, by chance or fate, near the communications hub that connected the mining complex to the orbital facilities. She shouldn't have stopped. She shouldn't have risked looking through the open door, where Kthar technicians were gathered around display screens, their scale backs to her. But something compelled her, some need to know if her desperate gamble had meant anything. What she saw froze her in place. The largest screen showed a tactical display of the Xylos system. Dozens of unidentified contacts were appearing at the system's edge, ships emerging for what the Kthar called void step and humans had once called fold space. One of the technicians was speaking rapidly into a communication device, its voice pitched high with what Lyra recognized as alarm. Configuration unknown. No response to identification requests. Count now at 37 vessels, largest estimated at Dreadnought class. They're deploying in attack formation. Orbital defense grid is. A deafening sound cut through the air, not from inside the facility, but from above, penetrating even kilometers of rock. It was followed by a tremor that sent Lyra staggering against the wall. The tactical display flickered, then stabilized to show several orbital defense platforms now missing from their positions. All stations, "This is Orbital Command," a new voice announced through the facility's general communication system. "We are under attack by unknown forces. This is not a drill. Implement security protocols immediately. All non-essential personnel to shelter locations. All troops to defense positions." Lyra backed away from the door, her mind racing. Unknown forces attacking a Cathar stronghold? It seemed impossible, yet the evidence was literally shaking the ground beneath her feet. Could it be? She never completed the thought. A massive explosion rocked the entire complex, far larger than anything she had experienced before. The lights failed, plunging the corridor into darkness broken only by emergency glow strips. Ceiling panels crashed down around her, and the distant sound of tearing metal suggested structural damage on a catastrophic scale. This was no mining accident. This was bombardment from orbit. Instinct took over. Lyra ran, not toward the evacuation points, but deeper into the complex, toward the slave quarters. If this was indeed an attack, if there was even the slightest chance it was a human response to her message, she needed to reach her people. The corridors were chaos, emergency systems failing, Cathar security forces running toward defensive positions, slave workers caught between conflicting orders to evacuate or shelter in place. Lyra navigated through it all, her slight build allowing her to slip past checkpoints where guards were distracted by the unfolding crisis. She reached the main barracks area to find it in disarray. The outer wall had been breached by some kind of explosion, exposing the interior to Xylos's toxic atmosphere. Emergency barriers had deployed, containing the breach, but the scene was one of confusion and fear. Varani and other slave species huddled together, many wearing emergency breathing apparatus, unsure whether to flee or hide. Lyra spotted Alara organizing the younger children, keeping them calm amid the chaos. The elder's face lit with surprise when she saw Lyra. "What's happening?" Alara asked, raising her voice above the continuing sounds of destruction from outside. "I think," Lyra hesitated, hardly daring to voice her hope. "I think someone heard us." Alara's eyes widened, comprehension dawning. The old stories? The humans? Before Lyra could respond, the emergency barrier at the breach point deactivated. Everyone tensed, expecting the rush of poisonous air, but instead, a figure stepped through from outside. The figure was humanoid, but unlike anything Lyra had seen before. Encased in sleek, matte black armor from head to toe, with no skin exposed, it moved with predatory grace. The helmet featured no traditional visor, only a featureless black faceplate for which a red targeting beam projected briefly, sweeping the room before deactivating. In its arms, the figure carried weapons unlike the crude shock batons of the Cathar, sleek, integrated systems that pulsed with subdued energy. For a terrifying moment, no one moved. The armored figure stood motionless, as if assessing the room. Then it reached up and touched the side of its helmet. The faceplate suddenly became transparent, revealing the face of a human male, weathered, scarred across one cheek, with eyes that had seen too much horror to be truly called kind, but weren't cruel either. "I am Sergeant Marcus Kane, United Terran Confederacy Special Forces," he said, his voice slightly distorted by the helmet's external speakers. "This facility is being secured. We're here to evacuate all non-Cathar personnel." A second armored figure appeared behind him, then a third. Unlike Kane, they kept their faceplates opaque. One took up a position guarding the breach. The other began scanning the room with a handheld device. The Varani remained frozen, disbelief warring with desperate hope on their faces. Generations of enslavement had taught them that unexpected changes rarely brought improvement. Lyra stepped forward, her voice steadier than she felt. "You're human? From Earth?" Kane's eyes fixed on her. "Yes. We received a distress signal from this location. Authenticated human colonial codes, pre-war." His gaze intensified. "Do you know anything about that?" Before Lyra could respond, the complex shook again with a series of rapid explosions, closer this time, within the facility rather than from orbit. "Cathar counterattack," reported the guard at the breach. "They're deploying heavy units from the southern barracks." Kane's expression hardened. We need to move. Now, he addressed the room at large. Anyone who wants off this rock, come with us. Transport's waiting, but we've got a 3-kilometer trek through a combat zone. A moment of silence followed, then Alara stepped forward. We will come. All of us. She looked around the room, her aged voice finding strength. Better to die free under the sky than live another day in chains. A murmur of agreement rose from the assembled slaves. Cain nodded once. Then his faceplate re-opaqued, returning him to the anonymous, intimidating figure that had first entered. Stay close. Do exactly as instructed. My team will get you out. He gestured to the breach. Alpha Team is clearing a path to the evac point. We move in 30 seconds. What followed was like nothing Lyra had experienced before, a nightmare journey through the disintegrating mining complex. The air outside was toxic to Verani lungs without filtration, so the human soldiers distributed emergency breathing apparatus, compact, efficient devices that put Cthar technology to shame. They moved in groups, UTC soldiers at front and rear, the civilians clustered in between. Through corridors lit by emergency lighting and the flames of destruction, past the bodies of Cthar guards and overseers cut down by weapons that left cauterized holes rather than bloody wounds. Twice they encountered Cthar resistance, security forces trying to prevent the escape. Each time, the UTC soldiers moved with coordinated precision that made the Cthar's efforts seem clumsy by comparison. Energy weapons discharged with low, thrumming sounds rather than the harsh crack of Cthar guns, dropping the scaled warriors before they could bring their own weapons to bear. At one junction, they came face to face with Overseer Vorg, leading a squad of elite guards. The Cthar stopped short, yellow eyes widening at the sight of the black-armored humans and their charges. Slaves, he bellowed. Return to your designated areas immediately. These intruders will be destroyed. Cain stepped forward, weapon raised. Last warning. Surrender or die. Vorg's face contorted with rage. Humans. Impossible. Your kind was broken. Your colonies purged. Apparently not, Cain replied and fired. The battle was brief and one-sided. The UTC soldiers moved like predators, their technology and training overwhelming the Cthar despite the latter's physical advantages. Vorg himself was the last to fall, not killed, but immobilized by some kind of energy net that contracted around his struggling form. Cain stood over the fallen overseer. This one comes with us. Command wants interrogation subjects. Vorg's yellow eyes blazed with hatred as he looked up at Cain, then fixed on Lyra among the escaped slaves. He hissed. Somehow you did this. When my empire discovers what has happened here, your empire, Cain interrupted, is about to discover that extinction runs both ways. He nodded to one of his soldiers, who administered something that made Vorg go limp, though his eyes remained hatefully aware. The rest of the journey passed in a blur for Lyra, running when ordered to run, ducking when told to duck, stepping over the bodies of fallen Cthar. The mining complex's main gates had been blown open from the outside, and beyond them lay the red dust plains of Xylos. But the landscape was transformed. Where before there had been only the stark utilitarian structures of the Cthar mining operation, now there was a battlefield. The skies above roiled with smoke and the flashes of orbital combat. Sleek black dropships moved through the chaos, deploying more UTC troops or evacuating civilians. In the distance, the Cthar command center was engulfed in flames. Smaller explosions continued to ripple through the complex as ammunition stores or power cells detonated in the heat. At a designated evacuation point, a relatively flat area half a kilometer from the main facility, a large transport vessel waited, its engines idling, ramp extended. More black-armored soldiers secured the perimeter, and medical personnel in less formidable but still sealed suits were treating injured escapees. As Lyra's group approached, she got her first clear view of the humans in action. They moved with purpose and precision, communicating in terse phrases or silent hand signals. Their weapons and technology were clearly superior to what the Cthar deployed on Xylos, though she sensed that this was a backwater posting for the Cthar, not their most advanced forces. Cain guided them to the transport. Get aboard, he instructed. This shuttle's headed for the Indomitable. You'll be processed there, given medical attention, and debriefed. Lyra hesitated as the others filed past her. Why now, she asked. We've been here for generations. Kane's faceplate depolarized again, revealing his face. Up close, Lyra could see the weariness etched into it, the weight of what must have been years of combat. We didn't know, he said simply. The Kthar told us all colonies in this sector were destroyed in the war. We believed them because we had to. Earth was in no position to verify after the orbital bombardments. And now, a grim smile flickered across his features. Now we're in a very different position, and very, very angry. He gestured to the transport. Go. We'll talk more once you're safe. Lyra boarded with the others, finding a seat in the crowded transport bay. Through the viewports, she watched more UTC soldiers securing the area, collecting what appeared to be intelligence materials from Kthar officers, setting demolition charges on key infrastructure. This wasn't just a rescue mission, she realized. This was an extermination. The transport lifted off, accelerating rapidly through Xylos's thin atmosphere. As it climbed, the viewport offered an expanding view of the operation below. The mining complex was now fully engulfed in flames, black armored figures systematically working through its outbuildings. Further out, other Kthar facilities were similarly aflame or already reduced to smoking ruins. Higher still, and the curvature of the moon became visible. Lyra gasped as she saw the orbital battle. Sleek, angular ships, black like the soldiers' armor, bearing the same red fist emblem, moved with impossible agility around the clumsier Kthar vessels. The difference in technology was stark. It appeared as if the Kthar were fighting with industrial equipment against purpose-built weapons of war. One massive ship dominated the space above Xylos, a behemoth of black metal and weapon emplacements that dwarfed even the largest Kthar command vessel. The transport adjusted course toward it. That's the Indomitable, explained a UTC medic who was moving through the cabin, checking the refugees. Admiral Volkov's flagship. You'll be safe there. Safe. The word seemed foreign to Lyra after a lifetime of danger and subjugation. The journey to the Indomitable took less than 20 minutes. The transport docked in a massive bay where dozens of similar craft were being serviced, loaded, or repaired. The organization was impressive. Hundreds of personnel moving with purpose, systems operating with seamless efficiency. As they disembarked, Lyra and the other refugees were directed to processing stations where medical staff assessed their conditions, provided nutrient supplements tailored to their species, and recorded their identities and origins. The humans were efficient but not unkind, though there was a clinical detachment to their interactions, professionals doing a job rather than saviors welcoming the rescued. While waiting for a medical assessment, Lyra overheard fragments of conversation between UTC personnel, completed the jamming of their long-range communication. They can't get word out. Found their data center intact. Intelligence teams are extracting everything. Admiral wants all command-level prisoners transferred to the Nemesis for interrogation. Casualties minimal. They weren't prepared for anything like this. It painted a picture of a devastatingly one-sided engagement. Whatever the Kthar had become in the century since their war with humanity, they clearly hadn't expected this level of technological advancement or military precision. After processing, the refugees were assigned to temporary quarters, Spartan but clean, with actual beds rather than the sleeping pallets of the barracks. Lyra found herself sharing a room with 3 other Varani, including Alera. The elder sat on her bed, running her hands over the clean sheets, as if she couldn't quite believe their reality. I never thought I would see this day, Alera said softly. To be free of them. Lyra sat beside her. Did you know? About the humans, that they might still exist. Alera's weathered face creased in a sad smile. We hoped. The stories said they were tenacious, that they had hidden worlds beyond the reach of the Kthar. But after so many generations, she shook her head. Hope becomes harder to maintain than despair. Their conversation was interrupted by a chime at the door. It slid open to reveal Sergeant Kane, now without his helmet. His dark hair was cropped short, military style, and without the armor, He looked more human, still dangerous, but approachably so. "Lyra," he asked, gaze moving between the room's occupants. She stood. "Yes. Admiral Volkov requests your presence on the command deck. If you're feeling up to it." Lyra exchanged a glance with Alara, who nodded encouragingly. "I'll come." Kane led her through the massive ship, a journey that revealed the true scale of the UTC operation. Thousands of personnel staffed the vessel, from technicians maintaining equipment to soldiers preparing for deployment. The ship itself was a marvel of engineering, its systems far more advanced than anything Lyra had seen in Kthar technology. They eventually reached the command deck, a vast space dominated by holographic displays showing the ongoing operation around Xylos. Officers moved between stations, issuing orders or analyzing data. At the center of it all stood a woman whose presence seemed to dominate the room despite her average height. Admiral Kyra Volkov was not what Lyra had expected. She had imagined someone like Kane, battle-hardened, physically intimidating. Volkov was slender, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a tight knot. Her uniform was simple black with minimal insignia, distinguished only by its impeccable fit and the small red fist emblem on the collar. But her face, that was where the true impact lay. Deeply scarred along the right side, it spoke of survival against terrible odds. Her eyes were pale gray, cold as space itself, yet burning with an inner intensity that made Lyra want to step back. The Admiral turned as they approached, assessing Lyra with a single sweep of those unsettling eyes. "So you're the one who sent the signal," Volkov said. Her voice was precisely modulated, betraying no emotion beyond mild interest. Lyra straightened her posture instinctively. "Yes, Admiral. Apparently using a transmitter that predates the war. One that shouldn't have functioned after a century of neglect." A faint smile touched Volkov's lips. "Resourceful. I was desperate," Lyra admitted. "I didn't truly believe anyone would hear it. Fortunately for you, we maintain listening posts specifically to detect such transmissions." Volkov gestured to a nearby display showing Xylos and its orbital space. "The Kthar presence here was minimal. A backwater operation they thought unworthy of significant defenses. Their mistake." Kane spoke up. "Admiral, we've completed the primary sweep of the facility. Data extraction is at 87%. All high-value targets secured. Casualties? Minimal on our side. 3 wounded, no fatalities. Kthar losses approximately 95% of their station forces." Volkov nodded, satisfied. "And the interrogations?" "Beginning now. Early results are interesting." Kane glanced at Lyra, then back to Volkov. This wasn't just a mining operation. The Admiral's eyes narrowed fractionally. "Explain." "They were running experiments. Biological, genetic, using the slaves." Kane's voice remained professional, but a muscle in his jaw tightened. "The facility director's files indicate they were testing various compounds, studying genetic adaptations to harsh environments and—" He hesitated. "Collecting reproductive material from multiple species." Lyra felt cold horror wash through her. The medical examinations the Kthar performed periodically, always painful, always humiliating, had been more than just checking their fitness for labor. Volkov's expression didn't change, but something in her bearing shifted, a predator catching the scent of prey. "Send all data to Dr. Harrington immediately. Priority analysis." She turned back to Lyra. "Did you know about this aspect of their operation?" Lyra shook her head. "We knew only that we were worked until we died. The purpose beyond mineral extraction wasn't shared with slaves." Volkov studied her for a long moment. "Your signal has changed everything. You should understand that. For a century, we've maintained a fragile peace with the Kthar, rebuilding our strength while they believed they had broken us permanently." Her voice took on a harder edge. "Now that illusion is shattered." One of the officers approached, offering a data tablet to the Admiral. Volkov scanned it quickly, then looked up with new intensity. "It appears the Kthar have been busy during our mutual silence. According to the data we've recovered, this facility was part of a broader program. They've been systematically cataloging genetic information from conquered species, preserving it in what they call the Soul Archives. What for? Kane asked. Insurance, Volkov replied coldly. If a species proves troublesome, they can exterminate it completely, yet retain the option to recreate it later as more compliant slaves. She handed the tablet back. They're playing God, Sergeant, deciding which species deserve to exist and in what form. Lyra felt sick. Where is this archive? A facility in the Argos system, apparently. Volkov's eyes gleamed with cold purpose. Our next destination. The implications hung in the air. This wasn't just about Xylos anymore. What had begun as a rescue operation was expanding into something larger, a war reigniting after a century of false peace. What happens to us? Lyra asked. To the Virani and the others you've rescued? Volkov considered her. That depends partly on you. We'll need guides, interpreters who understand Cathar operations, people who can help us identify which facilities contain prisoners to evacuate and which are purely military targets. Her expression softened marginally. But you won't be abandoned again. That much I can promise. A new alert sounded, and one of the officers called out, Admiral, we've completed the planetary scan, detecting no further Cathar life signs. All mining facilities and orbital platforms neutralized. Extraction of personnel complete. All UTC forces returned to their vessels. Volkov nodded, satisfied. Prepare for system jump. Set course for Argos Prime. She turned to Kane. Sergeant, please escort our guest back to her quarters. She'll need rest before we begin detailed debriefing. Kane led Lyra toward the exit, but before they reached it, Volkov spoke again. MS. Lyra. The Admiral's voice stopped them. Your people have a saying, I believe, about those who come from the black sky. Lyra turned, surprised. Yes. It's just a legend now, mostly forgotten. Legends often contain truth. Volkov's scarred face bore an expression Lyra couldn't quite interpret. The Cathar thought they had exterminated us, or at least broken our will to fight. They were wrong. Remember that when you feel fear in the days ahead, the greatest mistake our enemies ever made was believing we would stay defeated. As Kane led her back through the ship, Lyra felt the weight of everything that had happened, and everything still to come. The rescue of Xylos had been swift and devastating, but it was clearly just the opening move in a larger campaign. The Admiral, she said quietly to Kane as they walked. She lost someone to the Cathar, didn't she? Kane glanced at her. Her entire family. New Vladivostok colony. The Cathar tested a new bioweapon there, after the official end of hostilities. The UTC covered up to prevent panic and a return to full-scale war when we weren't ready. His voice lowered. She was off-world when it happened. Military academy. And she's been planning this ever since? Not just her. There are many in the UTC who never accepted the peace, who knew the Cathar would return to finish what they started once they believed we were no threat. He paused outside the door to her quarters. Your signal was the catalyst, but the thunder was already gathering. Lyra thought about this as she rejoined Alara and the others. The elder noticed her troubled expression. What did the Admiral want? Alara asked. To thank me for the signal. Lyra sat heavily on her bed. And to tell me we're going to war. Around them, the massive ship hummed with energy as it prepared to jump to a new star system. Above Xylos, the Cathar presence had been utterly erased, their facilities destroyed, their personnel killed or captured. The moon that had been a prison for generations was now free, but uninhabitable without the infrastructure the UTC had just methodically demolished. It was liberation through destruction. Freedom delivered by those who came not with open hands, but with weapons drawn and vengeance in their hearts. Lyra wondered, as exhaustion finally overtook her, whether she had called down saviors or something else entirely, a force of nature that, once unleashed, could not be controlled or contained. Either way, the thunder had arrived, and its echoes would soon be heard across the stars. For 3 days, the UTC fleet traveled through fold space, that strange dimensional shortcut that allowed vessels to cross vast interstellar distances in hours rather than years. During this time, Lyra and the other refugees from Xylos were debriefed extensively by UTC intelligence officers, providing what information they could about Cathar operations, hierarchies, and vulnerabilities. Lyra found herself working closely with Kane's special operations team, her geoempathic abilities and knowledge of Cathar systems proving unexpectedly valuable. They assigned her a translator implant, a small device attached behind her ear that allowed real-time conversion between languages and basic UTC protective gear. She wasn't a soldier, and they didn't treat her as one, but neither was she merely a refugee anymore. She had become something between ally and asset, respected for her knowledge, but still held at a distance by the professional wariness of a UTC personnel. Kane was the exception. The sergeant maintained his gruff exterior, but Lyra sensed a genuine concern beneath his professional demeanor. During training sessions where she learned to use UTC equipment or studied technical specifications of Cathar facilities, he showed unexpected patience. "Why did you join this fleet?" she asked him during one such session. "The seventh, I mean. The one kept hidden." Kane paused in his demonstration of an emergency beacon. "Family tradition, originally. My grandfather fought in the First Cathar War. Survived when most didn't." He set the device down. "Then personal choice after the European massacre. What happened there?" Cathar diplomatic delegation visited the Jupiter colonies. Claimed they wanted to establish trade relations. 15,000 colonists died when their true purpose, testing a new nerve agent, was revealed. His voice remained even, but his eyes hardened. "I was part of the cleanup crew. After seeing what they did to civilians, children." He shook his head. The seventh became the only logical choice. But the UTC maintained peace despite that. Lyra was genuinely puzzled. Why? Politics, economics, fear. Kane shrugged. The majority of humanity never saw the Cathar up close. They were told the incidents were isolated, that maintaining the armistice was better than risking another full-scale war. A grim smile touched his lips. That's why the seventh exists. For when the politicians finally acknowledge what some of us have always known, that the Cathar were never honoring the peace, just biding their time. Their conversation was interrupted by an alert. The fleet was preparing to emerge from fold space. All personnel were ordered to battle stations. "Stay in your quarters," Kane told her, already heading for the door. "This jump point is further out in the system than Xylos was. We're expecting resistance." But Lyra didn't return to her quarters. Instead, she made her way to the medical bay, where most of the refugees were helping to prepare for potential casualties. Alara nodded in approval as Lyra joined them. "Better to be useful than to hide," the elder said. Through the viewports, they could see the disorienting visual effect of the ship transitioning from fold space back to normal space. A shimmer like heat haze that briefly distorted the stars before solidifying into the familiar backdrop of space. Argo's prime star burned in the distance, a yellow-white beacon. Almost immediately, alarms sounded throughout the ship. Not the expected battle station's alert, but something different, a priority signal from the lead vessels. Over the ship-wide communication system, Admiral Volkov's voice rang out, tense but controlled. All vessels maintain position. Defensive Formation Alpha. Do not advance further into the system. The medical staff exchanged confused glances. This wasn't the aggressive entry they had expected. Minutes later, a senior medical officer entered, his expression grave. "We have a situation," he announced. "The Argos system is not as intelligence suggested." "Cathar defenses?" someone asked. "No." The officer shook his head. "No defenses at all. The system is dead." Later, gathered in one of the briefing rooms with Kane and several other UTC officers, Lyra watched the sensor recordings from the fleet's entry to the system. Where intelligence had indicated a heavily fortified Cathar presence centered around the Sol Archives facility, they found only debris fields and dead worlds. "The entire system has been sterilized," explained Commander Reyes, Admiral Volkov's executive officer. "Planetary bombardment patterns consistent with Cathar scorched Earth protocols. We estimate this occurred between 72 and 96 hours ago." After we hit Xylos, Kane noted. Precisely. Reyes highlighted a particular debris field. Based on residual energy signatures and material composition, this was the location of the Sol Archives facility. It was not merely destroyed, it was systematically obliterated, with particular attention to data storage sections. They're covering their tracks, said Kane. Volkov entered the room, her face more severe than Lyra had yet seen it. The officers stood at attention until she waved them back to their seats. The Kthar have implemented Code Black protocols, the Admiral announced without preamble. For those unfamiliar, this is their highest level of emergency response to existential threats. They are destroying evidence of their most controversial projects and falling back to fortified core systems. She activated a holographic display showing a star chart. Long-range scans indicate similar patterns of destruction in 3 other systems identified in the Xylos data. They're eradicating every trace of the genetic archiving program. What? Lyra asked, drawing surprised looks from several officers and used to a refugee speaking in such briefings. But Volkov merely nodded for her to continue. Why destroy something they spent so long building? Because it violates even their own ethical codes, Volkov replied. The Kthar present themselves to other galactic powers as harsh but principled conquerors. This program, the systematic collection and manipulation of genetic material from sentient species, would damage that image irreparably. This creates both a problem and an opportunity, continued Reyes. The problem is obvious. Our primary target no longer exists. The opportunity is more subtle. The speed and scale of their reaction suggest genuine fear. They believe we pose an existential threat. Don't we? Asked Kane. Volkov's scarred face showed the ghost of a smile. They certainly think so, Sergeant. And perception often matters more than reality in war. The meeting continued with tactical assessments and strategic recalculations. The destruction of the Sol Archives meant a change in objectives, from capture to pursuit. Intelligence suggested that while the physical archives had been destroyed, key Kthar personnel and possibly backup data were being evacuated to a facility designated Sanctuary Deep in a heavily fortified system near the Empire's core. As the briefing concluded, Volkov held Lyra back while the others filed out. You understand what this means? The Admiral said. It wasn't a question. Lyra nodded slowly. They're terrified. Of you. Of humans. Not just humans. The idea of us. Volkov moved to the viewport, gazing at the distant star. The Kthar built their empire on the assumption that they could contain, control, or eliminate any threat. Earth was supposed to be broken a century ago, reduced to a minor power grateful for scraps of territory. She turned back to Lyra. Instead, we rebuilt. We advanced, and we remembered. Her voice took on a colder edge. Now they face their worst nightmare. A technologically superior enemy with a century of grievances, emerging from what they thought was a conquered frontier. What happens now? Lyra asked. We follow them to Sanctuary Deep. Volkov's expression was implacable. We recover whatever data they're trying to preserve, and we use it to ensure every species they've cataloged has the chance to determine its own future. She paused. Including yours. It should have been a moment of hope. The prospect of liberating not just individuals, but entire species' genetic legacies. Yet Lyra felt an uneasiness she couldn't quite place. And after that, she pressed. Volkov studied her for a long moment. You want to know if this ends with the destruction of the Kthar Empire, or merely the correction of specific wrongs? Yes. That decision lies beyond my authority, Volkov said carefully. But history suggests that once such conflicts reignite, they rarely end with half measures. Her gaze was steady. Does that trouble you? Lyra thought of Xylos, of generations living and dying under Kthar oppression, of the Faithstone's ground to dust beneath Vorg's heel, of the medical experiments conducted without consent or knowledge. No, she said finally, but I don't want to become what I hated either. Volkov nodded, surprising Lyra with what seemed like genuine approval. A wise concern. One more leader should share. She gestured to the door. Get some rest. We jump again in 6 hours. The next phase of the campaign proved more challenging than Xylos. Sanctuary Deep was not an isolated backwater, but a fortified waypoint in Cthar space. The system itself was a natural fortress, a dense asteroid field surrounding a massive gas giant whose radiation belts interfered with sensors and communications. The facility was embedded within the largest moon, protected by defense platforms, patrol vessels, and a planetary shield. Lyra found herself increasingly integrated into Kane's strike team as they planned the infiltration. Her knowledge of Cthar protocols and systems, combined with her geoempathic abilities, made her valuable for the complex operation Admiral Volkov had authorized. Unlike the frontal assault on Xylos, this would be a surgical strike, a small team inserted through a maintenance portal in the planetary shield, while the main fleet engaged Cthar forces as a diversion. The objective is the central data core, Kane explained during the final briefing. His team, 12 of the UTC's most elite soldiers, would carry specialized equipment to extract and secure the genetic archives. Intel suggests they're consolidating all remaining copies there before final dispersal to deep storage facilities across Cthar space. And Lyra's role? Asked the team's second-in-command, Lieutenant Wei. Sensor package, Kane replied, gesturing to the specialized equipment Lyra would carry. Her geoempathic abilities can detect energy fluctuations and hidden compartments that our tech might miss. She's not combat personnel. She stays in the center of our formation at all times. The plan was precisely calculated, timetables synchronized across the fleet. The 7th would emerge from fold space, engage the outer defense perimeter, and create multiple false insertion points. Under cover of this chaos, Kane's team would deploy from a stealth shuttle, penetrate the shield through the maintenance portal, and infiltrate the facility. Theoretical success rate, 67%. Acceptable losses, classified. As Lyra donned the lightweight tactical gear they provided, a scaled-down version of the soldier's armor, with basic life support but no weapons, she felt a strange calm descend. After a lifetime of powerlessness on Xylos, she was choosing this risk, this mission, this potential end. Alara found her as she was making final preparations. The elder's face showed concern, but also pride. "You don't have to do this," Alara said softly. "You've already done more than any of us could have imagined." Lyra adjusted the sensor pack on her hip. "I do, though. The archives contain our history, the genetic memory of our people before enslavement. If there's even a chance of recovering that." Alara nodded in understanding. "Then carry our hopes with you." She pressed something into Lyra's hand, a small fragment of the central faith stone, somehow salvaged from the destruction on Xylos. "Remember who you are, even in the darkness." The mission began exactly as planned, a rarity in military operations, as Kane wryly noted. The UTC fleet emerged from fold space in perfect formation, immediately launching fighters and bombardment vessels toward the outer defense platforms. The Cthar responded predictably, scrambling their forces to meet the threat. Under this cover, the stealth shuttle carrying Kane's team detached from the Indomitable, its advanced cloaking technology rendering it virtually invisible to Cthar sensors. They approached the shield maintenance portal, a specialized aperture used for deploying repair drones to the shield's external projectors. The tension aboard the shuttle was palpable as they maneuvered through the narrow opening, a gap barely large enough for their vessel, with margins measured in centimeters rather than meters. "Breach successful," reported the pilot. Proceeding to insertion point Alpha, the shuttle descended through the moon's thin atmosphere, hugging the terrain to avoid detection. Their landing zone was a maintenance district 2 kilometers from the main facility, close enough to reach their objective quickly, far enough to avoid immediate detection. The team deployed with practiced efficiency, securing the landing zone before moving out in standard infiltration formation. Lyra stayed where instructed, in the center of the group, her sensor pack already collecting data on the surrounding area. "Energy signatures consistent with the facility schematics," she reported quietly, reading the translated outputs on her display. "But there's something else. A deeper power source not on the plans. Kane nodded, relaying the information to the team. They moved through the maintenance district, a maze of access tunnels, atmospheric processors, and automated repair bays. The facility's security was focused outward, toward the space battle, leaving these peripheral systems relatively unguarded. Their first encounter with Cthar security came at a checkpoint between sectors. For guards, standard armament. The UTC soldiers eliminated them with silent efficiency, using targeted neurological disruptors rather than energy weapons to avoid triggering alarms. 8 minutes to primary objective, Kane noted as they moved deeper into the facility. The central data core was housed in a massive circular chamber at the facility's heart. As they approached, Lyra's sensor pack detected increasing power flows and security measures. Multiple layers of biometric authentication, she warned, and strange energy readings, like nothing on Xylos. Kane signaled for a brief halt, consulting with his technical specialist. We anticipated this. Adaptive hacking protocols should get us through the outer layers. For the inner security, we have something special. He tapped a secure container one soldier carried. DNA samples from high-ranking Cthar officials, courtesy of our prisoners from Xylos. They continued forward, moving with increasing caution as they entered the facility's more sensitive areas. Twice more they encountered security personnel, dispatching them with the same silent efficiency. But Lyra sensed the growing unease among the team. They were meeting far fewer defenders than expected. Something's wrong, she whispered to Kane as they approached the final security checkpoint before the data core. There should be more guards, more resistance. Kane nodded grimly. They're either concentrated elsewhere or... He didn't finish the thought, but Lyra understood. The Cthar might be preparing to destroy the facility rather than risk its capture. The final approach to the data core required passing through a heavily secured airlock. The technical specialists deployed their hacking devices while 2 team members used the collected biometric data to spoof the authentication systems. After tense minutes, the massive doors parted with a pneumatic hiss. Beyond lay the data core, a vast spherical chamber whose walls were lined with crystalline storage matrices, glowing with soft blue-green light. At the center, a control nexus housed the systems that managed the archives. And there, waiting for them, stood a single Cthar. Unlike the guards they had encountered, this one wore the elaborate ceremonial armor of a high archivist. Elderly by Cthar standards, with scales faded from their typical vibrant green to a mottled gray-green, he showed no fear at their arrival. Right on schedule, the Cthar said in perfect Terran standard, his voice carrying the distinctive rasp of his species. I am High Archivist Zalter, custodian of the genetic legacy of over 200 sentient species. And you, I presume, are the thunder that follows lightning. Kane signaled the team to secure the room, weapons trained on Zalter. You were expecting us. Of course. Zalter made a gesture that might have been a shrug. From the moment your fleet destroyed Xylos, this confrontation became inevitable. The only questions were when and where. Where are your guards? Kane demanded. Evacuated, along with all non-essential personnel. Zalter's yellow eyes shifted to Lyra, widening slightly in recognition. A Verani. How appropriate that you should witness this moment. Lyra stepped forward, ignoring Kane's warning glance. You know what I am? I know what all of you are, Zalter replied. That is my purpose. To know, to preserve, to understand. He gestured around the chamber. Every species the Cthar Empire has encountered is archived here. Their genetic code, their cultural artifacts, their potential. Their potential as slaves, Lyra said bitterly. Zalter's expression shifted to something almost regretful. A crude interpretation, though understandable given your experiences. The soul archives were created not just for exploitation, but for preservation. He moved toward the central console, prompting the UTC soldiers to tighten their aim. Many of the species represented here no longer exist in living form. We are their only legacy. You're stalling, Kane said sharply. Step away from the console. I am contextualizing, Zalter corrected. What you see around you represents the work of centuries. The complete genetic and cultural record of species across multiple sectors of space, including, he added with pointed emphasis, humanity. That revelation sent a ripple of tension through the UTC team. Lyra saw Kane's posture stiffen. "You're lying," the sergeant said. "Humanity is very much alive." "Now, yes." Zalter's mouth curved in what passed for a Kthar smile. "But there were moments in our shared history when that was less certain. Did you never wonder how your species recovered so quickly from the brink of extinction? How genetic diversity was maintained despite the catastrophic population collapse following our initial war?" The implication hung in the air, disturbing in its potential truth. Could humanity's recovery have been aided by genetic material stored in Kthar archives? Had they been subjects of the same manipulation they now condemned? Before anyone could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Red emergency lighting bathed the chamber, and the data crystals pulsed faster. "Ah," Zalter said calmly. "It appears my superiors have made their decision." "What's happening?" demanded Kane. "Purge protocols." Zalter seemed resigned rather than alarmed. "The facility will self-destruct in approximately 15 minutes, destroying all archives to prevent their capture. Standard procedure when facing superior forces." Kane immediately activated his communication link. "Extraction team, this is Strike Leader. Facility is set to self-destruct. Begin emergency download protocols immediately." To his team, "Secure the archivist. Tech team, get everything you can from the central system." Lyra's sensor pack was suddenly alert with warnings. Massive power buildups throughout the facility, security systems activating independently, atmospheric processors beginning to introduce toxic elements. "We can't download it all in time," the technical specialist reported, frantically working at the central console. "The data volume is too massive. We need to prioritize." "Virani records," Lyra said immediately. "And any information on the Soul Archive's other facilities?" Kane nodded agreement. "And human genetic data. Anything involving Earth or human colonies." As the team worked, Zalter watched with curious detachment. "Fascinating," he observed. "Given unlimited scientific knowledge, you prioritize your own species. Just as we do. We prioritize freedom," Lyra countered. "Something your empire never valued." "Freedom is relative, child of Virani," Zalter said softly. "Do you truly believe your human saviors fight for abstract principles? Look at them, soldiers bred for war, carrying the genetic legacy of Earth's most efficient killers. They come out with open hands, but with weapons and rage." "Enough," Kane ordered. "Secure him for transport." Two soldiers moved to restrain Zalter, but the old Kthar made no resistance. Instead, he fixed his yellow eyes on Lyra once more. "You activated the beacon on Xylos," he said. "It wasn't a question. A human emergency transmitter from the pre-war colonization era. You sent the signal that brought them back." His voice lowered. "Do you understand what you've unleashed? Not just humanity, but the truth of what we all are beneath our civilized veneers." The facility shuddered around them as the self-destruct sequence continued. Sections of the archive were already going dark, crystal matrices shattering as their molecular bonds were systematically broken down. "Download at 28%, reported the technical specialist. "We need more time." Lyra moved closer to the central console, her geoempathic sense suddenly alert to something beneath the normal operational patterns. "There's a secondary system," she said urgently. "Independent power, isolated from the main grid." Zalter's expression changed, the first sign of genuine concern he'd shown. "Do not interfere with that system, Virani. It is beyond your understanding." Kane joined Lyra at the console. "What is it?" "I'm not sure, but it's not connected to the self-destruct sequence." She pointed to energy readings on her sensor display. "It's maintaining its own power, its own isolation. Almost like a backup," Kane concluded. "A hidden archive within the archive." Zalter moved suddenly, with a speed belying his apparent age. Before the soldiers could react, he had activated a hidden control on his ceremonial armor. Energy crackled around him, momentarily disrupting the UTC weapons systems. Some knowledge is too dangerous for either of our species, the archivist said, his voice hardening. Some legacies should remain buried. Kane recovered first, tackling the Kthar to the ground with methodical efficiency. But Zalter had accomplished his goal. A new security protocol activated around the secondary system, isolating it further. 10 minutes to complete facility destruction, announced an automated voice over the internal communication system. All personnel evacuate immediately. We can't break through these new security measures in time, the technical specialist said with frustration. Whatever he's protecting, it's locked down tight. Lyra studied the system, her geoempathic sense providing insights the technology couldn't. It's not just security, she realized. It's a transfer protocol. He's not just protecting the data, he's moving it somewhere else. Kane looked from Zalter, now securely restrained, to the rapidly deteriorating archive around them. Where? Another facility? No, Lyra said slowly, understanding dawning. It's being uploaded to a ship. Something in orbit, masked by the battle. Kane immediately contacted the fleet. Command, Strike Team Alpha. Priority target update. There's a Kthar vessel receiving data transmission from our location, likely disguised as routine traffic or hidden in the asteroid field. The response came from Admiral Volkov herself. Confirmed, Strike Team. We're detecting anomalous transmission patterns from your location to a position at the edge of the system. Dispatching intercept ships now. With the secondary system beyond their reach and time running out, Kane made the hard decision. We take what we have and the archivist. Extraction team, prepare for immediate evacuation. They had secured approximately 40% of the archive, a fraction of the total, but still the most comprehensive collection of Kthar biological research ever obtained by humanity. As they prepared to withdraw, Lyra made one final scan of the chamber, committing the site to memory. So much knowledge, so many species' legacies about to be destroyed. The journey back through the disintegrating facility was harrowing. Systems failed around them, sections decompressed, and automated security measures activated indiscriminately. 2 UTC soldiers were seriously injured by falling debris, requiring the team to adapt their formation to carry them. Zalter, their prisoner, maintained a stoic silence throughout the evacuation, showing neither fear at the destruction nor concern for his own fate. Only once, when they passed through a section containing what appeared to be physical specimens in stasis fields, organic samples of various species, did his composure crack slightly. A shame, he murmured, almost to himself. Some of these are the last of their kind. Their extraction shuttle was waiting at the rendezvous point, pilot already running pre-launch sequences as they approached. The team boarded quickly, securing the injured and their precious data cargo, while Kane maintained communication with the fleet regarding the mysterious transmission vessel. As they lifted off, the facility behind them began its final collapse, a cascade of structural failures followed by precisely calculated detonations that would leave nothing but molecular debris. Through the viewport, Lyra watched the monument to Kthar scientific arrogance crumble into dust. The shuttle accelerated hard, breaking atmosphere as the destruction below reached its crescendo. In the distance, the space battle continued, UTC vessels methodically dismantling the Kthar defenses while searching for the data ship. There, Kane pointed to a tactical display showing a small, fast-moving vessel breaking away from the asteroid field. That's our target. The shuttle pilot adjusted course to avoid the worst of the combat zone, making for the Indomitable with maximum thrust. Behind them, Sanctuary Deep was now just expanding debris and dissipating energy, centuries of accumulated knowledge scattered to the cosmic winds. Aboard the Indomitable, their return was met with controlled urgency. Medical teams took charge of the injured soldiers, while data specialists immediately began processing the extracted archive information. Zalter was escorted to a secure holding area for high-value prisoners, where he would face intense interrogation. Lyra, exhausted but unwilling to rest, made her way to the command deck. She found Admiral Volkov directing the final phase of the operation, the pursuit of the escaping data vessel. It's using some kind of advanced stealth technology, Reyes was explaining as Lyra entered. Conventional tracking is ineffective. Then use unconventional means, Volkov replied calmly. Follow the data stream. That ship is receiving transmissions from the destroyed facility. Those communications can be traced. Lyra stepped forward. I might be able to help with that. When all eyes turned to her, she explained about her geoempathic abilities. I sense the nature of the transmission. It has a signature, an energy pattern I can recognize. Volkov considered this, then nodded sharply. Get her to sensor control. If she can provide any advantage, use it. In the sensor control center, Lyra worked with the technical specialists to calibrate the Indomitable's advanced detection systems to the specific frequency pattern she had sensed in the archive. It was delicate work, translating her geoempathic impressions into the precise technical parameters the systems required. Eventually, they succeeded. A faint trace appeared on the long-range scanners, a vessel accelerating toward the system's edge, where it could safely enter fold space. We have you now, murmured a sensor technician as the trace solidified. Volkov's orders were immediate and unambiguous. All available interceptors, pursue and disable that vessel. I want it intact if possible, but the primary objective is to prevent its escape with the archive data. A squadron of UTC strike craft broke formation, accelerating to maximum velocity on an intercept course. The Cathar vessel, detecting the pursuit, increased speed and began evasive maneuvers. What followed was a tense chase through the outer reaches of the Argos system. The Cathar ship was smaller and faster than the UTC interceptors, but unable to enter fold space while so close to the system's gravitational well. It needed to reach a minimum safe distance, a goal the UTC was determined to prevent. From the sensor control center, Lyra watched the pursuit unfolding. The Cathar vessel was piloted with exceptional skill, using the asteroid field and radiation belts to confuse tracking systems. But the UTC pilots were equally determined, adjusting their tactics to the shifting conditions. Finally, a critical error. The Cathar ship attempted to use a dense asteroid cluster for cover, only to find UTC interceptors had anticipated the move and positioned themselves on the far side. Caught between approaching forces, the vessel attempted a desperate maneuver that brought it within range of the lead interceptor's ion cannons. The weapons fired, precisely targeted to disable the ship's propulsion systems without destroying it completely. The Cathar vessel tumbled, drive systems flickering and dying as the ion disruption took effect. Target disabled, reported the squadron leader, moving in to secure. But the Cathar had one final surprise. As the UTC interceptors approached, energy readings from the stricken vessel spiked dramatically. Self-destruct sequence detected, warned the sensor specialist. They're overloading their power core. The UTC vessels pulled back immediately, but it was too late for a complete retreat. The Cathar ship exploded in a brilliant flash of energy, the detonation far more powerful than its size would suggest. 2 interceptors caught in the blast perimeter were severely damaged, their crews requiring emergency evacuation. When the energy discharge dissipated, nothing remained of the Cathar vessel but scattered debris, and with it, whatever portions of the Sol archives it had managed to receive. In the aftermath, as the UTC fleet regrouped and began treating casualties, Lyra found herself in a debriefing with Admiral Volkov, Kane, and several senior officers. The data recovered from Sanctuary Deep was being analyzed, but preliminary reports were already available. The archives contained information on approximately 217 sentient species, explained Dr. Harrington, the fleet's chief xenobiologist. Of these, 43 are listed as extinct in natural state but preserved genetically. 86 are classified as subjugated species within the Cathar Empire. The rest are categorized as potential subjects or observed only. And the Varani? Asked Lyra. Harrington consulted her notes. Listed as subjugated, priority conservation. Your species was apparently highly valued for both geoempathic abilities and genetic adaptability. And humans? Kane asked the question everyone was considering. Harrington hesitated. That's more complicated. Human genetic data is indeed present in the archives, collected during the war a century ago. But it's marked with unique classification codes we haven't fully deciphered yet. What about the secondary data, the information Zalter was protecting? Volkov asked. We recovered only fragments before transmission was complete, Harrington admitted. But what we did recover is disturbing. She displayed a partial data set on the briefing room's main screen. It appears to relate to an ancient species predating both human and Cathar civilization. The Cathar refer to them only as the precursors. Another extinct species? Reyes asked. Unknown, Harrington replied. The data suggests they may have left the galaxy voluntarily, but not before leaving various technologies and genetic markers scattered across multiple worlds, including, she added with significant emphasis, Earth and the Cathar homeworld. The implication hung in the air that both humans and Cathar might have been influenced or even engineered by this ancient civilization, that the conflict between them might be part of some long-forgotten experiment or plan. Volkov dismissed this line of speculation with a sharp gesture. Focus on actionable intelligence. What does the recovered data tell us about other Cathar facilities, about their military capabilities and weaknesses? The meeting continued, strategies revised, new objectives identified. The destruction of Sanctuary Deep had dealt a significant blow to the Cathar Empire, but it was only one facility. The war, for it was now officially acknowledged as such, would continue. As the briefing concluded, Volkov asked Lyra and Kane to remain. When they were alone, the Admiral's typically stern expression softened marginally. You've both performed exceptionally under difficult circumstances, she said. The recovered data will be invaluable, not just for military purposes, but for the future of multiple species now within our protection, including the Varani, Lyra said. It wasn't quite a question, especially the Varani. Volkov activated a smaller display, showing genetic sequencing data. Your species information is among the most complete we recovered. Dr. Harrington believes it will be possible to address the genetic damage caused by generations of Cathar selective breeding and experimentation. Kane leaned forward. What about the escape data? The ship that self-destructed? Volkov's expression darkened. A significant setback. Whatever Zalter was protecting, he considered it worth dying for. The interrogation team reports he's maintaining complete silence on the subject. He won't talk, Lyra said with certainty. I sense his resolve. He truly believes he's protecting something essential. Everyone believes in something, MS. Lyra. Volkov's voice was cold. The question is whether that belief can withstand prolonged isolation and psychological pressure. Lyra felt a chill at the implication. Despite everything the Cathar had done, despite her own suffering under their rule, the clinical detachment with which Volkov discussed interrogation techniques disturbed her. What happens now? She asked, changing the subject. We continue, Volkov replied simply. This operation was always meant to be the beginning, not the end. The Cathar now know we've returned with capabilities exceeding their own. They know their crimes against subject species have been exposed. They will react, defensively at first, then with increasing aggression as they mobilize their full military might. And we'll be ready, Kane stated. We will. Volkov stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Sergeant Kane, your team will have 48 hours rest cycle before new assignments. MS. Lyra, Dr. Harrington has requested your assistance with interpreting some of the Varani genetic data. Your unique perspective would be valuable. As they left the Admiral's office, Lyra felt the weight of everything that had happened, and everything still to come. The liberation of Xylos, the destruction of Sanctuary Deep, the recovered archives. Each was a victory in its way, but each also raised new questions, new complexities, new moral ambiguities. Kane seemed to sense her troubled thoughts. You did good work today, he said as they walked. Without you, we wouldn't have recovered half of what we did, and lost half of what we didn't, she replied. The archives contain my people's entire history, Kane. Our cultural memory, our original homeworld location, our evolution before the Cathar found us. Most of that is still gone. But not all, he reminded her. And what we save will help free other worlds, other species. She nodded slowly. At what cost, though? The UTC didn't come as peacekeepers or liberators. You came as avengers. I've seen the way your soldiers look at Cathar prisoners, the way Volkov speaks about the war. There's a hunger for retribution that goes beyond justice. Kane stopped walking, turning to face her directly. Is that wrong? After a century of believing our colonies were simply destroyed, we discover the truth, that people were enslaved, experimented on, their very genetics cataloged like specimens. But the peace we thought we had was a lie. His voice remained level, but she could sense the intensity beneath. If not retribution, what would you call an appropriate response? I don't know, Lyra admitted. But I know what hatred did to the Cathar. It made them believe they were justified in treating other species as resources, as tools, as less than fully sentient. I don't want to see humanity walk the same path. Kane was silent for a moment, seemingly weighing her words. Come with me, he said finally. There's something you should see. He led her not to the medical bay, as she expected, but to a quiet observation deck overlooking the fleet. The battle was over. The Cathar forces at Sanctuary Deep had been utterly defeated. The viewport showed the assembled UTC vessels against the backdrop of stars, powerful and ominous in their dark hulls and minimalist design. When I joined the 7th Fleet, Kane said, gazing out at the ships, my commander told me something I've never forgotten. He said, "We are not the lightning that strikes without warning. We are the thunder that follows, inevitable, unstoppable, but never without cause." He turned to Lyra. This isn't blind hatred or simple revenge. It's accountability. The Cathar believed they could do anything to any species without consequences. They were wrong. And when the thunder has passed, Lyra asked softly, what then? Kane's expression softened slightly. Then we rebuild. We help the species they've harmed recover their independence, their cultures, their futures. He gestured to the stars beyond the fleet. There are worlds out there where people like your Varani still live in chains, believing no one will ever come for them. We're going to prove them wrong. Lyra considered this as she looked out at the assembled might of humanity, a force that had emerged from presumed defeat to deliver judgment upon their former enemies. There was something both terrifying and inspiring in that resilience, that refusal to accept finality even in apparent destruction. I hope you're right, she said finally. I hope that when this war ends, there's something left worth rebuilding. In the days that followed, the fleet prepared for its next campaign. The recovered data from Sanctuary Deep revealed multiple Cathar facilities involved in the genetic archiving program, as well as slave worlds and resource extraction operations similar to Xylos. Admiral Volkov prioritized these targets, deploying strike teams for liberation operations while the main fleet prepared for larger engagements. Lyra found her role evolving beyond that of refugee or even guide. Her insights into Cathar psychology and operations, combined with her geoempathic abilities, made her increasingly valuable to the UTC command structure. She worked closely with Dr. Harrington, helping interpret the recovered Varani genetic data, while also assisting intelligence officers in planning future operations. More liberated slaves arrived as new worlds were freed, members of dozens of species, each with their own story of Cathar oppression. A community formed among them aboard the UTC vessels, united by shared experience, if not biology. Lyra often found herself serving as an informal liaison between these diverse refugees and the human military that had saved them. It was in this capacity that she approached Admiral Volkov with a proposal that would change the nature of the campaign. The liberated species need more than rescue, she explained during a meeting in the Admiral's office. They need agency, participation in their own liberation. I'm proposing the formation of a multi-species auxiliary force, trained by UTC personnel, but composed of volunteers from former slave worlds. Volkov considered the idea with typical analytical precision. Combat effectiveness would be questionable given the varied physiologies and lack of standard training. Not for frontline combat, Lyra clarified. For intelligence gathering, cultural liaison, post-liberation stabilization. Many of these species have abilities humans lack: geoempathic sensing, enhanced visual spectrums, specialized environmental adaptations. Those can be invaluable in the right context. After extended discussion and review by the command staff, Volkov approved the proposal. The Interspecies Liaison and Support Division, quickly nicknamed the Liberated by UTC personnel, was formed under joint command of Kane and Lyra. Initial recruitment exceeded expectations, with volunteers from over 20 species joining the unit. As the war expanded from targeted strikes to full-scale liberation operations, the Liberated proved their worth repeatedly. Former slaves returned to their homeworlds as advanced scouts, identifying Cthar vulnerabilities and making contact with resistance movements that had survived in secret for generations. Others served as cultural interpreters, helping the UTC understand the specific needs and challenges of each world they freed. For Lyra, the work provided purpose beyond vengeance, a way to channel the pain of the past into something constructive. With each successful operation, each world liberated, each species reclaiming its sovereignty, she felt a measure of healing not just for herself, but for all those who had suffered under Cthar rule. The conflict lasted 3 years, a brief war by historical standards, but one of unprecedented intensity and scope. The Cthar, initially blindsided by humanity's return and technological advancement, eventually marshaled their full military might. But it was too late. The UTC had calculated precisely, striking at the Empire's most vulnerable points first, liberating slave worlds whose populations immediately rose up against their oppressors. When the final peace was negotiated, aboard the Indomitable, at Admiral Volkov's insistence, it was not the armistice of a century before, but a true dissolution of the Cthar Empire. The former Imperial core worlds would retain their sovereignty but relinquish all claims to conquered territories. A coalition of liberated species, with UTC support, would govern the transition to independence for hundreds of worlds. The Sol Archives data recovered from Sanctuary Deep proved crucial in this process, providing the genetic information needed to restore species that had been selectively bred or modified for generations. Dr. Harrington's team, working with scientists from multiple species, developed techniques to reverse the most damaging genetic manipulations while preserving unique adaptations that populations wished to maintain. For the Varani, this meant the gradual restoration of geoempathic abilities that had been selectively enhanced for mining purposes but had damaged other aspects of their physiology. It meant the rediscovery of cultural practices hinted at in the recovered data but long forgotten under Cthar rule. It meant, most fundamentally, the freedom to determine their own evolutionary path forward. High Archivist Zalter, after months of silence, finally spoke during the peace negotiations. His revelations about the precursors and their possible influence on both human and Cthar development remain classified at the highest levels, deemed too potentially destabilizing for general release. But the broader ethical questions his work raised, about genetic manipulation, species preservation, and the right to evolutionary self-determination, became central to the post-war legal framework. On the final day of the war, as the Cthar delegation signed the formal surrender documents, Lyra stood on the observation deck where Kane had brought her years before. The sergeant, now Captain Kane, joined her there,